Hello, welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. New reports reveal that unemployment rose from last week, and announcements to cut jobs have hit a 16-month high. This as the Federal Reserve says they could impose even more restrictive policies, and recession fears continue to loom. Here's NTD's Melina Wisecup with more.
Jobless claims are ticking up. The Labor Department's report today reveals that 4,000 more people filed for unemployment last week than the week before. Applications for jobless aid rose to 235,000, the highest in the past 6 months. And job cuts are predicted to rise as companies brace for a possible recession. An analysis released today by Challenger, Gray & Christmas reveals that U.S. employers announced over 32,500 cuts in June. That's a 57% increase from May. To get a look at what this means for our economic outlook, I spoke with Charles Steele, the chairman of economics at Hillsdale College. What's your take on the overall labor force, and do you think that employers are in some way bracing for the possibility of a recession?
I think that is a possibility. It does seem to be what is going on. But more interesting is that job openings have decreased to 11.3 million. So that's a drop of about 400, a little over 400,000. And so it does look like maybe employers are kind of starting to retrench a little bit, worried about a possible recession.
Steele says there is confusion in the air about the state of the economy. Unemployment or layoffs have not substantially increased, and economic activity rose by 2%. Still, the economic output last quarter shrank.
GDP was down in the first quarter by 1.6%. And if that continues, of course, that's the definition for 2 quarters, that's a definition of a recession.
This as the Federal Reserve has lowered their expectation for economic growth for the rest of the year. The Fed says they could adopt even more restrictive policies if inflation doesn't cool off soon. And the Federal Reserve's aim to slow down the economy is one reason why gas prices have gone down by about 30 cents over the past few weeks.
The thinking is if the economy slows down, that will slow down consumption. And on that worry, we've seen a little bit of an improvement. Oil prices declining, the wholesale price of gasoline declining. In addition, we've also seen some modest improvements in supply.
But will this downward trend continue?
Now, we did see a reversal today, oil back up 5%. But I think for now, there's enough room that gas prices nationally could still decline 20 to 35 cents a gallon over the next few weeks.
But there's still a long way to go for prices to reach a more normal range of around $3 per gallon. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
FBI Director Christopher Wray on Wednesday delivered a rare joint statement with the Director General of the UK's domestic intelligence agency, MI5. The two leaders had a warning about China.
We consistently see that it's the Chinese government that poses the biggest long-term threat to our economic and national security. And by our, I mean both of our nations along with our allies in Europe and elsewhere.
Wray and his counterpart at MI5 warned about the CCP's covert theft, forced technology transfers, research exploitation, and cyber attacks. Wray said the Chinese regime sees cyber as the pathway to cheat and steal on a massive scale. And that's not all.
But in addition to traditional and cyber-enabled thievery, there are even more insidious tactics they'll use to essentially walk through your front door and then rob you. The Chinese government likes to do this by making investments and creating partnerships that position their proxies to steal valuable technology.
The FBI director encouraged business leaders to coordinate with the FBI and MI5 to protect themselves and prepare for future attacks. Wray said that allies and partners in the free world are in this together, and they need to work together to address the threat posed by the Chinese regime. Reports are coming out that the U.S. has been selling our strategic oil reserves that were specifically released by the Biden administration to help lower the cost of fuel in the United States, to, of all countries, China. At the same time, FBI head Christopher Wray and head of the British intel agency MI5 issued that joint statement that we just told you about, warning the West over the threat of communist China. Here to assess, we have Texas Congressman Pat Fallon. Congressman Pat Fallon, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Oh, no, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Congressman, it's being reported that the U.S. is selling our strategic oil reserves to other countries, specifically China. How can this happen, and can anything be done to prevent this, given the nature of fuel prices in the U.S.?
Well, no, that's a great question. And, under President Trump at the peak, the strategic oil reserve had 695 million barrels. Right now, it's just under 498 million. So a pretty drastic reduction of almost 30%. And the strategic oil reserve was intended when it was created to be used in time of national emergency or a natural disaster, not for political expediency, which Joe Biden's trying to do now. We filed legislation, I believe it was H.R. 7996, which would prevent this from happening from just from basically by decree by Joe Biden, and it would take an act of Congress. I think that's a far more responsible way to use the strategic oil reserve moving forward.
Now, Congressman, speaking of China here, the head of the FBI and British intel agency MI5 issued a warning that China, specifically Chinese espionage, poses a great threat to the West. What should Congress or could Congress do, and the president for that matter, to thwart the China threat?
Well, the first thing Joe Biden could do is actually acknowledge that the threat exists. When you get the president of the United States quoting, saying things like, a strong and vibrant China is in the best interest of the United States. No, a democratic government in China that has legitimacy and stops meddling in other countries' affairs is in the best interest of the United States and the world. And, the MI5 director, General Ken McCollum, as you just mentioned, along with Director of the FBI, Wray, have warned the dire threat that China poses. I mean, let's look at this. Russia's a threat. We all know that. Particularly, we knew that before the invasion of the Ukraine, but that really manifested itself when they chose to invade a neighboring country. But China has 11 times the population of Russia and 11 times the economy. So they're a clear and present danger to the United States and really to the world peace and prosperity. And they're teaching their young people, and they're mostly ethnically Han. I think it's about 94% of China's ethnically Han. They're teaching their kids that they're destined to rule the world, where in our public schools, too many of them anyway, we're teaching them to be ashamed of their country. And we're the greatest country history's ever known.
Congressman, switching gears just a moment here to the border. The border crisis has been magnified in recent days. In your state of Texas, counties are calling on the governor there to declare the border crisis as an invasion. Is the United States being invaded at the southern border?
I think absolutely. You can't deny it. I mean, if you just look at the statistics, the worst month we've ever had in our history for vis-a-vis illegal border crossings was in April of this year, where it was 234,000. That's never happened before, with about 60,000 known gotaways, so over 300,000 people. But that was only eclipsed by May, when the May numbers came out, and it was nearly 240,000. Since Joe Biden's taken office, 2.6 million people have crossed the border illegally, another 700,000 known gotaways. So about 3.3 million people, which is more than the population of 22 United States. 1,060,000 pounds of illegal narcotics have been seized on the border. And just since Joe Biden's taken office in FY22, 7,000 pounds of fentanyl, which is enough to kill every man, woman, and child, about 10 times over. The drug cartels make $30 billion a year with illegal narcotics trafficking. And now they're making, estimates are as high as $1 billion, with a B, $1 billion a month on human smuggling, on the illegal migrants crossing the border. If that's not an invasion, I don't know what is.
Congressman, if in fact Governor Abbott does declare this situation as an invasion, what might he be able to do differently to stop this?
Well, there's different legal minds differ as opposed is what the direct effect would that be. But I know one thing, that it would we need to make the American people aware of what's really going on the southern border. The mainstream media is ignoring it. They have no idea. They don't understand that, in Mexico, if a journalist actually reports on cartel activities, they're most likely going to be murdered along with their entire family. So you see, the liberal press doesn't want the American people to know the threat, because if they actually did know the threat, they would demand a secure border. So that would be a great step in the right direction just from a PR standpoint. But also it might, I would argue, and I would push the envelope to do, if I were the governor of Texas, to do as much as humanly possible to secure the border, because the federal government and Joe Biden has abdicated their responsibility, and it's a gross dereliction of duty.
Texas Congressman Pat Fallon, thank you.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
Senator Rick Scott arrived in Taiwan this afternoon for a 3-day visit to the island nation. The senator will meet with top Taiwanese officials to discuss U.S.-Taiwan relations, security, and trade issues. And President Biden reacts after UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's stepping down. What does his resignation mean for the U.S. and for Western allies' efforts in helping Ukraine?
And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks.
Facing controversies in office, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced his resignation Thursday after dozens of government ministers quit and told him to go.
But the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States runs so deep, and it's so important that actually I don't think it really matters who is in Downing Street or who is in the White House. That relationship will continue on regardless.
But the transition comes at a critical point for the two countries as they continue to provide aid to Ukraine and are looking to strike a trade deal. Meanwhile, Johnson promising that efforts in Ukraine won't change.
That I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes.
And Biden issuing a Thursday statement calling the two countries, quote, the closest of friends and allies, with the White House saying,
So I'll say this, our alliance with the United Kingdom continues to be strong. Our special relationship with the people in the country will continue to endure. None of that changes.
Meanwhile, Biden's statement notably did not mention Johnson by name, a sharp shift from those of his predecessors when previous British prime ministers left office. Luke Coffey is a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute. Coffey tells NTD that Biden's response could have a political consideration.
So for many Americans, too, Boris Johnson was viewed as the Trump of the United Kingdom. So this probably factored in President Biden's lack of response on a personal level.
And Johnson said he would stay in his position until a successor is chosen, a process which could take several weeks.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.